Larry Swearingen's final 24 hours. Executed but innocent? On a hot Texas evening in August 2019, a man was led into the death chamber for the last time. His name was Larry Swearingen, and for nearly 2 decades he had insisted he was innocent of the crime that put him on death row. 5 execution dates had come and gone, each one halted at the last moment as new evidence and expert opinions cast doubt on the case. But this time, there would be no delay. Strapped to the gurney, Larry's final words echoed a defiant plea. "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Minutes later, he was gone. Tonight, we'll step into his final 24 hours, the last meal he ate, the last prayers he whispered, and the controversy that still haunts Texas. Was he guilty, or did the state silence an innocent man? Stay with me, and don't forget to subscribe for more prison documentary stories. Dear friends, the story of Larry Swearingen begins not in the death chamber, but years earlier in a small Texas community, where the disappearance of a young woman would ignite one of the most controversial trials the state had ever seen. On December 8, 1998, 19-year-old college student Melissa Trotter vanished after leaving class. She was bright, deeply involved in her church, and her sudden disappearance left a town in shock. Days passed without answers, and when her body was finally discovered in the Sam Houston National Forest, investigators were certain they had their man, a construction worker named Larry Swearingen. From that day forward, Swearingen's life became a battle not only against the state of Texas, but against time itself. For more than 20 years, he would sit on death row, proclaiming his innocence, clinging to evidence he believed proved it, and fighting a justice system unwilling to listen. Melissa's final day seemed ordinary. She attended her classes at Montgomery College, chatted with friends, and then walked across campus carrying her books. Witnesses later said they saw her with an older man in the cafeteria, someone who matched the description of Swearingen. Investigators quickly zeroed in on him. Swearingen was no stranger to police. He had a checkered history, including theft, minor run-ins with the law, and a reputation for trouble. Soon, circumstantial evidence began to pile up. Her school papers were found near his parents' home. Strands of her hair were discovered in his truck. And most damning, a piece of pantyhose found in his house matched the one used to strangle Melissa. But there was a problem: the timeline. Forensic experts later testified that Melissa's body showed signs of being killed days after Swearingen was already in jail on unrelated charges. Blood under her fingernails didn't match him. DNA evidence at the scene excluded him. Yet the jury never heard all of this. In June 2000, Swearingen faced trial in Montgomery County. Prosecutors painted him as a cold, calculating predator. They argued that the circumstantial evidence spoke louder than any scientific doubts. The fibers on her clothes, the pantyhose ligature, the school papers all tied her to him, they said. The defense countered with experts who questioned the state's timeline. How could Melissa have been dead for 25 days if decomposition suggested otherwise? How could Swearingen be the killer if he was already behind bars? But in the end, the jury was unmoved. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict. The death sentence followed swiftly. Melissa's family wept, believing justice had been done. Swearingen sat silently, his face expressionless, but later told reporters, "They just convicted an innocent man." From the moment he entered Texas's infamous death row at the Polunsky unit, Swearingen began writing letters, appealing to courts, and speaking with journalists. He insisted the evidence didn't add up. 5 times the state scheduled his execution, and 5 times it was halted. Each stay brought a flicker of hope, only to be extinguished again. Forensic experts from across the country submitted affidavits, arguing the state's case was impossible, that Melissa's body was too well preserved to have been dead for as long as prosecutors claimed. They pointed to stomach contents, insect activity, and decomposition, all suggesting she died days after Swearingen's arrest. But the courts remained firm. They called the evidence circumstantial but overwhelming. Each appeal was denied, and slowly, the years eroded his hope. On the morning of August 21, 2019, Larry Swearingen awoke knowing it was his last day alive. At 48 years old, he had spent nearly 2 decades in a small, windowless cell, waiting for this moment. Breakfast was simple eggs, bread, and juice. Texas had abolished the special last meal tradition years earlier, so his food was no different than any other inmate's. He ate slowly, each bite heavy with meaning. Later that morning, a chaplain came to pray with him. Swearingen bowed his head, whispering quietly, his face calm but pale. By noon, his family visited for the last time. Behind thick prison glass, they pressed their hands against his. Words were few, the pain too heavy. His wife, his children, his parents, they all knew this was goodbye. For a man who had spent years fighting to prove innocence, there was nothing left to say. In the afternoon, his lawyers made one final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing again that the forensic evidence exonerated him. At 5:45 in the evening, the answer came back, denied. The last door had closed. At 6 o'clock in the evening, guards entered his cell. Swearingen stood, shackled, and was escorted down the narrow corridor known as the Last Mile. Witnesses later said he walked steadily, shoulders squared, no tears in his eyes. The chamber was cold, sterile, white walls, bright lights, and the gurney waiting at its center. Swearingen lay down without resistance. His arms were strapped, IV lines inserted. Behind a glass window, two groups sat divided. Melissa Trotter's family on one side, Swearingen's on the other. The warden asked for final words. Swearingen looked up, his voice calm but firm. "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Then he added, "It's burning in my right arm," as the lethal drug pentobarbital began to flow. Within minutes, his chest slowed. His breathing grew shallow. At 6:47 in the evening, the state of Texas declared Larry Swearingen dead. Outside the prison, protesters held signs reading, "Stop executing innocents." Melissa's family, meanwhile, told reporters they finally had peace. To them, justice had been served. To others, a terrible mistake had just been made. Forensic experts who had fought to save him remained outraged. One scientist called it a travesty of justice. Another said, the state ignored science to carry out an execution. The debate continues to this day. Did Texas execute a guilty man? Or did they silence an innocent one to preserve the system? Dear friends, Larry Swearingen's story is not just about one man and one crime. It is about the questions that linger long after the drugs have stopped flowing. What if the science was right? What if he really didn't do it? How many others might be trapped in the same cycle, condemned not by proof, but by circumstance? His final words, echoing scripture, were both a prayer and an accusation. "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And so, his story leaves us with a haunting question: was it justice, or was it the irreversible silence of an innocent man? As the curtain closed on Larry Swearingen's life, Texas declared justice complete. Yet for many, the doubts never went away. Was this truly the punishment of a guilty man, or the silencing of someone who had spent 2 decades insisting on his innocence? The science, the timelines, and the unanswered questions still echo louder than the gavel that once condemned him. For Melissa Trotter's family, the execution marked closure to years of grief. For others, it symbolized the terrifying possibility that the system can move too swiftly to kill and far too slowly to admit mistakes. Larry's final words, "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing," still hang heavy in the air. Tonight, his story challenges us to reflect on justice, mercy, and truth. Was it justice or tragedy? If stories like this move you, subscribe now and stay with us as we continue uncovering the haunting last hours behind prison walls.